in the making of articles for the recovery of his trade, knock his teeth down his throat instantly, he wrote. As Parliament drafted its report in response to the hearings, Henson and the United Knitters continued to bolster support everywhere they could. This time, he traveled to Ireland.
I'm listening to Blood in the Machine. It's about the Luddites, the beginning of the 19th century. I didn't realize the Luddites went back to 1811. That was interesting. So you're looking at Napoleon period, and already machines were having a huge impact on the British economy. Anyway, it's a really interesting book, and I keep thinking all the time when I look at what's going on with the Iran war, what is the definition of insanity again? They're going to spend a lot of money on this war and kill a lot of people, and nothing's going to change. Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever. Go back as far as you want, right? But anyhow, whatever. I wrote a thing about the feel-good country, which is the United States of America. And, as long as people are comfortable paying $500 for a ticket in the gallery to see a UFC fight and chant USA, USA, then they're happy. What can you do about it? Do I have my, yeah. Then they're happy, and, they're not going to do anything about anything, which is, it's a feel-good nation, and people feel pretty good there, so why would they care? It's like, we didn't vote for Trump to get us into a war, but he did, and he's anointed by Jesus Christ to, bring in the third temple and usher in the end times and whatever the heck you believe in. So it's okay. It's absurd. It drives me nuts. A friend asked me, he doesn't really understand what I'm on about in my posts at Substack, which I understand. There's much to criticize about my writing and what I'm on about. So I understand that, but basically I do it because it helps me work things out for myself. I'm reading a lot and thinking about stuff. And so if I write it, I can work it out in my own kind of way. Of course, my own kind of way is my own kind of way, which is odd. That it's, I just don't fit into the mainstream thing. I understand why people in the United States have their perspective, most people. I used to watch Fareed Zakaria, and I used to read The Economist and Bloomberg Business Week and so on, especially when I was doing business. And, I had a fairly conventional parroting of, the status quo back then. And it's just, when you're exposed to a constant stream of this propaganda, you start thinking that way. And yeah, it's propaganda because it's not information that's meant to help you pay for your truck or your medical insurance or anything else. It's just there to keep you believing in various U.S. American narratives, so that you'll just go along with things. And as long as you go along with things, it's going to be rinse and repeat all the time, because if you get away with murder, you get away with murder. You start to believe that you can get away with murder, and so you just continue. It's a very gangster kind of ethic, and people don't seem to mind. We tend to worship gangsters in the United States. Yeah, sure, they have gangster movies in Hong Kong and Japan and whatever. But, the U.S. kind of broke the mold. And another friend of mine reminded me again about this other kind of way of thinking in the United States, which is, you criticize your own government all the time because for half the population, the other side is always evil and crazy. So Republicans hate Democrats, Democrats hate Republicans. So they all have great stories and reasons and complaints about each other. The whole world's going to hell because of the Democrats, because of the Republicans. So simple. And so you can very eloquently criticize the other side, rationally, eloquently, and it all makes sense, right? Just wait for the next election, and when the other side gets in, everything will be better. Which isn't true. It never works out that way. But anyhow, the second thing is that people in the States are really concerned about other people's leaders. Like, I don't particularly care if Putin is the president of Russia or if Xi is the president of China or whatever the title is. It's not my concern. I'm not a global big businessman playing the great game. So it's nothing to me, right? And when I'm in Russia or when I'm in Japan or in China or somewhere in the world like Portugal or whatever, people don't seem to mind being Chinese. And I suppose if they really hated Xi or whatever, they would do something about it, since there's 1.4 billion people in the country. But for now, at least, they seem to be benefiting, so they go along with it. And if America still benefits from living in a world of Trump, then I guess they'll go along with it, right? They're certainly not going to rise up and demand that the United States not finance genocide and send weapons to everybody in the world that they want to fight their battles for them. The big international, global, financialized, capitalist game is not for you, my friends, not for you. George Carlin said it well, it's a big club and you're not in it. So I don't get it. People are really angry about Xi, or they're worried about Taiwan. What do you care about Taiwan? I've lived in Taiwan. Taiwanese people are nice. It's a nice place. I know a lot of Taiwanese business people. I worked with lots of Taiwanese people in mainland China, and they just want to make money and do business and so on and so forth. China and Japan do a lot of trade. The only people getting hurt by America's actions in Iran, its war of choice, are, other countries, Japanese and Filipinos and Chinese and whoever. And somehow, the realist, Mersheimer or whoever, has to, you have to accept the reality of great power politics and all that. We can't think beyond that, right? In 2026, despite all the information we have, all the knowledge we've garnered over the generations and so on. We just can't imagine doing anything differently. That's because you're not playing the game. That's why I don't understand. If you have a bond ladder and a stock portfolio and you care about your retirement fund and all that stuff, I would think that unless you're heavily invested in the military-industrial complex and the support companies surrounding that business ecosystem, you might not like these wars that much. But as long as the stock market's doing okay, it doesn't really matter to most people who have investments. And there's never any sense that, Iranian people, it's not a monolith. There are different kinds of Iranian people, and there's politics in Iran as well. And, not everyone's Taliban in Afghanistan or whatever it is, the Ba'ath people in Iraq. And other than Iran, really, which is an ancient country and culture, most of the Arab states were drawn up and established by the United States and Britain and blah 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 after World War II, and that was specifically just to be able to control energy flows, oil and gas, because the whole world runs on that stuff, so it makes total sense. But it's not like Dubai or Qatar are ancient Arab Bedouin cities. These are kingdoms that are supported by players of the great game. There wasn't anything in Dubai, before the World War II. It was a little desert village. Maybe there was a little mud castle or something by the watering hole. I don't know. I mean, you can watch Lawrence of Arabia going back to that era or whatever. You understand that it's about the energy and the resource flows that people are fighting over, the original great game between Russia and Britain and so on. It's all about trade, right? And it's funny because we can trade. And before these wars, we were trading with Iran. It's just that some business people wanted us to trade with a different Iranian. So maybe you'll trade with Russia if Putin's not the boss, but for some reason you hate Putin. I don't know what Putin has done to you lately, but anyway. Is he a great guy? Is he a saint? Hell no. But is anyone in the United States government a saint? I don't think so. So there's one big, strong, badass country in the world, and that's the United States of America. They have the energy, they have the resources, they have the money, they set up the rules of the game, the world order, rules-based order or whatever. They follow international law when it suits them. When it doesn't, they ignore it. So and it's a litigious culture. They're just constantly at each other domestically anyway. But that's the country that makes the moves. That's the country that decides who goes to war, what civil wars happen, and so on and so forth. If they like Gaddafi, they work with him. If the business people don't like Gaddafi, then they turn Libya into a failed state and make sure the guy gets killed. And this happens over and over and over again. It's not so hard to understand. So I just don't understand why everybody's so excited about hating other cultures and hating other people and hating other people's leaders. If there's a coup or a regime change in Venezuela or anywhere else in the Americas, it's going to be at the behest of the United States. The U.S. will have a finger in it, always, whether it's Chile or Colombia or Panama or Mexico or anywhere else. It always has, it always will, because there are American business interests, and those are very important. You don't have to go back to United Fruit or whatever. There's so much history, and there's so many good books about all this stuff. Who started the war in Ukraine kind of thing. If it wasn't for the machinations of the great game, there wouldn't be a war in Ukraine. There'd be oil flowing into Europe. We'd all be laughing here. The pipelines wouldn't have been blown up. There wouldn't be hundreds of thousands of dead people on both sides, and so on and so forth. It's just that some people want to do business with different people that are, better to do business with for them. It has nothing to do with you. And that's the other part of the story, is that Americans just believe in whatever, whatever sect or God or whatever thing, ideology or whatever, they want to believe in, and that's that. There's no discussion, there's no going beyond the belief, because belief feels really good. It feels better to believe, just believe. And that leads to, hey, look, I'm resigned. There's nothing I can do about any of this. And you have TSA agents walking out of quitting their jobs, basically, because they don't have any collective bargaining, I guess. They don't have any labor movement or union, I don't know. But anyway, they decided they were going to quit rather than go on strike. So they all walk off the job. What does that tell you? You know, it's not about you, but you can't do anything about it, right? So you will just go along to get along. The bully's in town, you can't really fight him, so you pay him off and get along. You know, try to do the best you can under the circumstances. And people are going to feel that way. Plus, so there's nothing you can do about it, so never mind. Just get on with it. Plus, it's really hard to wrap your head around all these complex issues and systems and black box technologies and whatnot in our world. It's very hard to keep up with it and to understand how it all works. It's exhausting. You don't have time for that. You know, life is hard enough without worrying about these things, right? And reading a book takes time and all that kind of thing. And, you know, if you think like me, it's not going to make you any friends. It's not going to make you popular. You know, it's like, you don't fit in, ostracized. Get the heck out. And I've talked to lots of friends in the States who were evangelicals, and they had some liberal views, and they were literally ostracized from their church, which broke their hearts. It really hurt, you know, to be cast out away from your friends just because you didn't believe the same way they believe. And I have friends who spent their whole life in the Unification Church, have children who all went to college and got along quite well. And they probably weren't too horrified at being in the Unification Church, or they would have left. And why should I care if my friend wants to be a member of the Unification Church? Why should I care if you're a Hasidic Jew or you know, a Catholic or Episcopalian, or whether you like basketball or football? I mean, you know, it's not really that big a deal, you know, what you believe in. And so on. I would just hope that people would feel empowered enough that they had enough agency to look at what's going on in the world and say, wait a minute, some of this stuff doesn't make sense and it has to end. And we need to do something about it. But I don't reckon that's going to happen. So I'm pissing in the wind. And, you know, whatever. What am I trying to do? Change the world? I already said I do this to work things out in my own mind, and I share it, and of course, so what? But, you know, I reckon that there's a high probability that nobody has the right stuff to do anything about any of this. You can join the army and you can go fight in Iran or whatever. That's fine. That's your business. And good luck, and I hope you don't get killed and all that kind of thing. But we're not going to really address the causes of our ills, in particular with our environment, ecocide, genocide, PFAS, climate change, whatever. We're just not going to do it because it feels too good living in the modern info tech, you know, civilization. It's just too comfortable. And as long as it's comfortable, we're not going to worry about it that much. When things start to get really uncomfortable, and they will, because we're past peak oil anyway. You know, the thing that really runs our global civilization is oil and gas, and you can read The Honest Sorcerer or whatever, Vaclav Smil or whoever, to learn about that if you're interested. But it's going away, and there is no miraculous thing coming along. If you know anything about physics, and I'm not a physicist or a cosmologist or a biologist, but I know a little bit about these things because I've read a few books or a few articles or a few papers. And if you know anything, just like me, just a tiny little bit about these things, you know there are limits to everything. And nature dictates those limits. It's not our fantasies, not our dreams, not our stories, not our desires, and so on. And so forever you've had these wonderful philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism and whatever, where people have just come to terms with their limitations and the fact that human supremacy is stupid. So, but you know, in the West, we're God's creatures. We're chosen. The Israelis were chosen, and whatever. So the big God cares more about them than anything else in the universe. So they're very comfortable to just continue the conquering, continue, you know, the biblical catastrophe until they can't anymore, basically. And I find that sad because I just can't not feel something for children buried in the bounced rubble of Gaza and Lebanon and Syria and you know, Iran. And I know for Americans those people don't matter, right? And Trump's still talking about, you know, freeing white South Africans. No sense of history whatsoever. And, you know, I'm not sitting here saying that Nigerians are better people or Japanese people are better people. It took me a long time to get comfortable with Japanese culture. I was a bull in a china shop when I first got over there. I was just a crass, young, privileged, white American boy. And I did all kinds of stupid things there that I'm sure lots of Japanese and Chinese people thought was stupid and immature. But I didn't, especially when I was hanging out with my Western friends. And you know, you tend to act out for your clique, right? Ha ha ha. And then when you're with Japanese people or Chinese people, you behave yourself because you realize they have their shit together and they're living their lives, and you're not all that, right? American supremacist kind of thing. And they tolerate us and they treat us real nice because they want to flatter us, because they know we're terribly prone to flattery. We love it when people act like we're special because we want to be special. That's one of the things we want to be all the time, is super special. And it took me a while to clock that, to get that. That these people really thought I was a fucking immature idiot, but they were treating me well for various reasons, having to do with their culture and with global circumstances. And I thought they really liked me. You know, it's just the way it is. I mean, it's complicated. There's nothing I can say in a few minutes that can cover all of it. You know, if you spend a lot of time in a country, you'll go through periods. Hopefully you'll learn something. You know, I think for some expats, they don't learn anything because they're so well taken care of. They're so wealthy and privileged, and they're in gated communities, and they're so walled off that they have no clue. You know, they're basically in America in Shanghai, in America in Tokyo, right? Azabu Juban or something like that. Roppongi, some place near Roppongi in a penthouse. I had friends who worked for Goldman Sachs. I mean Goldman Sachs in Tokyo, and you see how they live, you know. And then I had Japanese friends whose parents lived in a tiny apartment. Anyway, whatever, you go on and on about that. But that's basically it, right? A feel-good country that still feels good about itself. You know, they're still all riled up from propaganda about other people's leaders. You know, why don't you just leave them alone? There'd be fewer refugees. People want to stay home in their country and do what they got to do in their own culture to get along. And every country has problems. And you might have terrible problems in Ecuador or Peru or wherever, but what's it to us? Nothing. It's what it is a big thorn in the foot of the players of the great game. Somebody who's concerned about global markets and concerned about global business and energy and material flows, these systemic issues, they're pissed off. They want somebody else in power. But we keep regime changing and it just continues. For a while it's okay, then something happens, a revolution or whatever, and then you have to regime change them again. And why is this? I reckon, I'm just guessing, that not everyone in the world wants to be a US American. I know it's a pretty cool country, and most people want cool stuff. And if you want cool stuff, at least 20 years ago, the best place to get it all was America. So in the 70s, if you're in Portugal, you want to go to New York State because you'll have a better chance of having better stuff if you're in New York State than if you're in Leiria. That's just a fact. So some people do want to immigrate to the United States, right? Because it makes sense. Other people have to go because the great game has wrecked their own country so much that they got to go somewhere to try to survive. You create a whole bunch of Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugees and so on and so forth, Central American refugees, that they got to go somewhere. And this is what we do to the world. It has nothing to do with like asteroids hitting the Earth. You have this species of dinosaur living on the planet for millions of years, and then whoops, an asteroid hit, and they're all dead. Well, it took nature millions, tens of millions of years to bump off these creatures. And we've been around for 300,000 years, more or less, as far as we know, the best guess, based on the best scientific tools and methods we have today. And how long are we going to last? Another 50 years, another 100 years, another 300 years? Who knows? But at this rate, not long. And why should I care? I mean, just make your film, Stephen, and shut the fuck up. That kind of thing. And I understand that. And it's true. Nothing I could do about it. So it is good to focus on your art projects and forget about all this other stuff, because people just don't care that much. If they did, they would have stood up and done something about it. The Jacobins or the Luddites or whoever, the communists, the Bolsheviks, just whatever. People have stood up and tried to do something. Not that it was effective or not. It seems like people with the power and the money tend to control things anyway, eventually, no matter what happens. But people have tried different things, And it's funny, you think that you're going to spend a lot of money and bomb a lot of stuff in Iran, and it's going to be different from the outcome will be different than Afghanistan, Iraq, different than Vietnam, different than firebombing Dresden and Tokyo. Curtis LeMay didn't win World War II against the Japanese. The Russians came in, they told Japan they were going to come in. Japan knew its goose was cooked, or its rice was cooked. And America didn't win World War II. The Soviets spent 20 million people fighting the Nazis, and eventually marched right into Berlin ahead of General Patton. Oh my God. And so, they eventually had to quit, but they didn't quit because we firebombed Dresden. And no matter how many studies come out, how many books are written about these things, nobody cares, because the facts don't matter. The evidence doesn't matter across domains of interest and inquiry. None of that matters. It's too complicated. It's no fun. And I don't want to believe in it, because it doesn't feel good to believe that I might have some tiny bit of responsibility for the mayhem in the world. So these poor kids demonstrate about the Palestinians, and they're vilified. And it's just like the Luddites, concerned about their job and their way of life because of the machines at the time, going around breaking tools and breaking machines. And the the people in charge saying you can't do that. Private property is everything. Have you not read John Locke? Have you not read Adam Smith and so on and so forth? What's wrong with you? Private property, okay? Property rights, okay? Not the commons, none of this nonsense. That's stupid. That's medieval. That's Dark Age stuff. Well, we're going to be Bronze Age beefcakes again anyway. We'll be scavenging around for a whole bunch of copper to make Bronze Age weapons or obsidian knives to cut each other's throats with someday in the future. Because it's very unlikely, highly improbable, that we're going to find some miraculous form of energy that's going to allow us to mine the universe. Because even the Earth will run out of rare earths and certain kinds of minerals at some point. So if you can't do the for all mankind, capture the asteroid in Mars orbit so that you can mine it for all the minerals you need to do all your high technology, you're screwed. And the fact is, there are limits to growth. So we're stuck with that. So my project, if anything, is trying to put my head around all this polycrisis stuff and maybe try to do a little Chicken Little or whatever, don't look up, and say to people, if you want things to be different, you're going to have to make them different, which means you'll have to cultivate an imagination, and you'll have to educate yourself a little bit, and you'll have to connect with other people. You'll have to work with other people, and that includes people from other cultures and other countries. And it would be far better to trade with Iran, to have the oil flowing out of the Straits of Hormuz, and to have the pipeline going into Germany so that Germany could make BMWs, electric ones, of course. But there can only be one Belt and Road, and it either has to be a Chinese one or an American one. And Xi is evil because he cares about the Chinese one, and Putin's evil because he cares about the Russian one. And Trump's evil because he cares about the American one. Oh, go figure. But honestly, it's so much easier just to trade in peace with people, and then to have this global scientific and intellectual networking necessary to find solutions to problems so that, the degrowth period that we're going to all go through, whether we like it or not, is less painful and horrific than it otherwise would be if we continue on the trajectory that we're on now. So that's what I'm on about. Back on the bike. Take good care. Have a nice week. Bullies out.